Welcome to Southern Sound, where we delve into the stories of rock legends. Today, we spotlight John Fogerty, the distinctive voice and songwriter behind Creedence Clearwater Revival, whose music became the soundtrack of a generation. John Cameron Fogerty was born on May 28, 1945, in Berkeley, California. He was the third of five brothers, growing up in a post-war America that was brimming with promise and a growing appetite for change. His father, Galen Fogerty, worked for the Berkeley Gazette and later as a lithographer, while his mother, Edith Lucile, had once aspired to be a singer and instilled a love of music in her sons. The family dynamic was complex. His parents eventually divorced, but music remained a constant. From a young age, John displayed a fascination with rhythm, melody, and sound. He was captivated by the emotional pull of country, rockabilly, and rhythm and blues artists like Hank Williams, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley. When he was just in the fourth grade, he first picked up a guitar. That seemingly small moment would prove to be the ignition for a lifelong career that would define American rock music for decades. John attended El Cerrito High School, where he formed a friendship with classmates Doug Clifford and Stu Cook, two names that would later be immortalized in the rock history books. Around this same time, John's older brother Tom Fogerty was already exploring the world of music. Tom, a guitarist and singer, had a band called Spiderweb and the Insects, and he quickly recognized John's raw talent. Tom invited his younger brother into the scene, and soon they began playing together. In 1959, John, Tom, Doug, and Stu formed a band originally known as the Blue Velvets. The group mostly played instrumentals and cover songs, earning small gigs in the Bay Area. By the early 1960s, the group began recording music and caught the attention of Fantasy Records, a small independent label based in San Francisco. The label signed them, but under a condition: they had to change their name. And so, the Blue Velvets became the Golliwogs. The Golliwogs era was modest in terms of commercial success, but crucial for John Fogerty's development as a songwriter and frontman. He honed his skills in composition, vocal delivery, and studio production, while working part-time jobs and even being briefly drafted into the U.S. Army Reserves. By the mid-1960s, John had taken the creative reins of the band. His vision was clearer than ever: tight instrumentation, swampy rhythm, and southern imagery, even though he was a California native. And soon, he'd have the chance to bring that vision to life. In 1967, everything changed. Fantasy Records was sold to new management, and Saul Zaentz, soon to become a key figure in both John Fogerty's success and his greatest legal struggles, took control of the label. Zaentz recognized potential in the Golliwogs and gave them a fresh chance, including a new name. At John's suggestion, the band was reborn as Creedence Clearwater Revival, a combination of Creedence, from a friend of Tom's, Clearwater, inspired by a beer commercial, and Revival, which reflected the band's new creative rebirth. From the very beginning, CCR sounded like nothing else on the radio. John's voice, raw, powerful, and tinged with southern soul, cut through the fuzz of psychedelic rock and polished pop. While his contemporaries in San Francisco leaned into freeform jams and flower power, Fogerty looked south. He conjured up bayous, riverboats, and working-class anthems that evoked places he had never even visited. It was Americana viewed through a California lens, and listeners loved it. Their self-titled debut album dropped in 1968, and the breakthrough single was a cover of Dale Hawkins' Susie Q. It became a top 40 hit and got them radio play nationwide. But it was just the beginning. That same year, CCR released Bayou Country, featuring the now iconic Proud Mary. With its rolling rhythm and unforgettable chorus, "Rollin', rollin', rollin' on the river," the song cemented Fogerty's place as a master of narrative songwriting. The single hit number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and Tina Turner's future cover would further immortalize it. From 1968 to 1970, CCR went on an almost superhuman run. Albums like Green River, Willie and the Poor Boys, and Cosmo's Factory produced a stream of hits: Bad Moon Rising, Green River, Down on the Corner, Fortunate Son, and Who'll Stop the Rain. These songs became part of America's DNA, used in film soundtracks, protest rallies, and bar jukeboxes across the country. Fogerty wrote, sang, arranged, and produced nearly all of CCR's material. He was a perfectionist in the studio, often clashing with bandmates over control, but the results were undeniable. In just 3 years, Creedence had become one of the biggest bands in the world, outselling the Beatles in the US in 1969. But success came at a cost. Behind the scenes, tensions were rising between John and the rest of the band, especially Tom. Tom felt overshadowed and creatively stifled. Meanwhile, John grew increasingly frustrated with Fantasy Records and Saul Zaentz, whom he felt was exploiting the band financially. By 1971, Tom Fogerty quit the band. And just 1 year later, Creedence Clearwater Revival officially disbanded. After the breakup of Creedence Clearwater Revival in 1972, John Fogerty found himself at a creative and emotional crossroads. The band that had made him a household name was gone. His brother Tom had left over disputes John couldn't reconcile. And his relationship with Fantasy Records, and particularly its owner Saul Zaentz, was becoming increasingly bitter. Still, music was part of Fogerty's DNA, and he couldn't step away for long. In 1973, Fogerty released a solo album under a pseudonym, the Blue Ridge Rangers. Rather than showcasing new original work, the album consisted entirely of country and gospel covers, including Jambalaya, On the Bayou, and Hearts of Stone. Remarkably, John played every instrument himself: guitar, bass, piano, drums, and all the vocals, a clear signal that he intended to go it alone, both artistically and personally. The album performed modestly, but John wasn't done yet. In 1975, he released a self-titled solo album, John Fogerty, which leaned more into rock but failed to gain commercial traction. Despite his best efforts, he found it hard to escape CCR's towering shadow, especially as the legal conflicts with Fantasy Records escalated. He attempted a full retreat from the spotlight. Fogerty moved to a ranch in Oregon and largely disappeared from public life. For nearly a decade, he became something of a rock and roll recluse. He didn't tour. He didn't record. He focused on his family, raising his children, and staying as far from the music business as he could. But deep down, the music was still simmering. By the early 1980s, a new generation of listeners was discovering CCR's music. Vietnam War films like Apocalypse Now and Forrest Gump featured Creedence tracks, reintroducing Fogerty's voice to younger ears. Radio stations continued to play Fortunate Son, Have You Ever Seen the Rain, and Bad Moon Rising, keeping the CCR sound alive. And then, in 1985, John Fogerty made one of the most celebrated comebacks in rock history. John Fogerty's 1985 album Centerfield marked a triumphant return to the spotlight. The title track, with its iconic baseball-themed imagery and chorus, Put Me In, Coach, I'm Ready to Play, became an instant American classic. The song still echoes in stadiums to this day. But the album was more than nostalgic, it was a statement. Tracks like The Old Man Down the Road and Mr. Greed weren't just catchy, they were veiled jabs at the people Fogerty felt had wronged him in the music industry, particularly Saul Zaentz of Fantasy Records. The success of Centerfield was undeniable. It went double platinum and earned Fogerty a new generation of fans. But it also sparked one of the most bizarre and historic lawsuits in music history. Zaentz and Fantasy Records sued John Fogerty for plagiarizing himself. The claim? That The Old Man Down the Road was too similar to Run Through the Jungle, a Creedence Clearwater Revival song written and recorded 15 years earlier and owned by Fantasy Records. In effect, Fogerty was being accused of ripping off his own artistic style. The case, which went to court in 1988, became a landmark moment for musicians' rights. Fogerty didn't just win, he took the stand, guitar in hand, and demonstrated in real time how the songs were compositionally different. The jury sided with him, and in doing so, established a precedent: an artist could not be sued for mimicking their own creative voice, especially if the rights to their earlier work had been sold or transferred. It was a moral and artistic victory. But Fogerty didn't stop there. He filed a countersuit to reclaim legal fees, which went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1994, he won again, not just for himself, but for countless artists navigating the murky waters of copyright law. But despite the legal wins, one wound remained open. John Fogerty still did not own the rights to the songs he wrote for Creedence Clearwater Revival. That music, the soundtrack of a generation, was still legally in the hands of Fantasy Records. It would take decades for that to change. By the mid-1990s, John Fogerty had emerged from his battle scarred but victorious. He had won in court, revived his solo career, and rebuilt his confidence as a performer. But something was still missing: emotional closure. Throughout his earlier years, Fogerty had carried immense bitterness toward Fantasy Records, toward Saul Zaentz, and even toward his former Creedence bandmates. The rift with his brother Tom Fogerty remained unresolved, worsened by their creative disputes during CCR's final days. Tragically, Tom passed away in 1990 from complications related to AIDS, contracted through a blood transfusion. The two had not reconciled before his death. John admitted in later interviews that this left a hole in his heart. He described their relationship as deeply complicated and filled with unspoken pain. "The older I get," he once said, "the more I wish I'd picked up the phone." But out of this grief came a powerful transformation. John began to reconnect with the joy of performing. In 1997, he released Blue Moon Swamp, an album that leaned into swamp rock, blues, and Southern Americana, everything Creedence had stood for, but more polished and personal. The album earned him a Grammy Award for Best Rock Album and marked a creative high point in his post-CCR career. What changed most during this period was Fogerty's focus on family. He married Julie Kramer in 1991, a woman who would become a powerful stabilizing force in his life. Julie helped John navigate the business side of music, manage his image, and most importantly, encouraged him to let go of the past. They raised 3 children together, and all of them, Shane, Tyler, and Kelsey, eventually took an interest in music. John didn't just encourage their pursuits, he started performing with them. His sons Shane and Tyler formed a band called Hardy Har, and John began appearing on stage with them, creating something he hadn't truly had before, a musical family that healed old wounds instead of creating new ones. As he toured throughout the 2000s and 2010s, fans noticed a new energy. John was smiling more, laughing, reflecting with warmth. The once defensive rock legend now performed Creedence hits with pride, sharing them with new generations and often ending shows with his sons by his side. The man who once refused to play his old songs had finally found peace in his past. For most of his career, John Fogerty's name was synonymous with Creedence Clearwater Revival, but tragically, the legal rights to CCR's catalog were not. Fantasy Records owned those masters, and Saul Zaentz, once his bitter enemy, held them for decades. Despite winning major legal battles, Fogerty was never able to perform, re-release, or profit from CCR's original recordings on his own terms. It was a wound that lingered well into his later years. But time changes everything, including who's in charge. In 2004, Saul Zaentz sold Fantasy Records to Concord Music Group. One of the first things Concord did? They apologized to John Fogerty. The label acknowledged the injustices he'd faced and offered to begin repairing the relationship. That same year, Concord released a remastered CCR compilation album with Fogerty's full support, the first time since the 70s that he had been officially connected to Creedence's legacy in a positive way. This moment marked a turning point. Fogerty began performing CCR hits in earnest again, not just out of obligation, but celebration. In 2008, he performed at the Democratic National Convention. In 2012, he appeared at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. His sets were filled with Green River, Born on the Bayou, Up Around the Bend, and Have You Ever Seen the Rain? Still, even though the relationship with Fantasy had softened, the master recordings remained out of reach until 2023. In January of that year, at age 77, John Fogerty finally acquired the global publishing rights to the entire CCR catalog. It was a headline-making moment that fans and industry insiders celebrated. After more than 50 years, the man who had written the songs finally owned them. It was poetic justice, long overdue, hard-fought, and richly deserved. For Fogerty, it meant control. For fans, it meant peace. And for the music industry, it meant another reminder that artists' rights matter. In interviews following the deal, Fogerty expressed joy, humility, and gratitude. "It's a surreal moment," he told Rolling Stone. "I'm the dad. These are my songs. And now I finally get to raise them." John Fogerty's musical legacy is far bigger than the years he spent at the top of the charts. To truly understand his impact, you have to look beyond just the hits. You have to listen to the unmistakable voice, raspy, urgent, and haunting, that shaped what we now think of as Americana rock. You have to study the songwriting, simple, often 3 chords, but packed with imagery, storytelling, and moral weight. Fogerty didn't just write songs, he wrote anthems. Fortunate Son became a generational protest song, used in films and documentaries to symbolize anti-war sentiment and class struggle. Bad Moon Rising, with its catchy, upbeat tone hiding lyrics of foreboding doom, was used in everything from An American Werewolf in London to The Walking Dead. Who'll Stop the Rain was poetic, political, and timeless. These weren't just songs of their time, they transcended decades. Fogerty's influence touched artists across genres. Bruce Springsteen cited him as one of his biggest inspirations. Bob Dylan called him one of the greatest songwriters alive. Country artists like Alan Jackson and Brad Paisley praised his ability to blend rock and country without losing either's authenticity. And younger generations? They may not always know his name, but they know his sound. That swampy, southern rock riffing. That soulful howl. That sense of something distinctly American, raw, flawed, passionate, and proud. Even in modern music, echoes of Fogerty can be heard in alt-country bands like Wilco, rock revivalists like Kings of Leon, and protest-minded songwriters like Jason Isbell. Through it all, John remained humble. In interviews, he often seemed almost amazed that his songs had become cultural touchstones. "I was just writing what I felt," he once said. "I didn't know it would stick around this long. But it did. And it will." If you ever wanted to understand the staying power of John Fogerty, all you need to do is go to a baseball game. You'll hear Centerfield echo across stadiums from Boston to Los Angeles. You'll see kids singing along, gloves in hand, mouthing the words, "Put me in, coach." It's a ritual now. A national tradition. And it's all because of one man's love for America's pastime and his ability to turn feeling into music. Fogerty's later years haven't been quiet, they've been celebratory. Since 2010, he's performed around the world, often accompanied by his sons. The family band setup has given his shows a new energy, not just nostalgia, but continuity. It's as if he's handing the baton forward in real time, on stage, under lights, guitar slung over shoulder. He's collaborated with a wide range of artists in recent years, from Foo Fighters to Keith Urban, from Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top to Brad Paisley. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Fogerty released a quarantine version of Have You Ever Seen the Rain performed with his kids in their backyard. It went viral, a moment of unity and warmth during a dark time. He also published a memoir, Fortunate Son, My Life, My Music, in 2015, offering fans a deeper look at the battles he fought, not just with contracts and critics, but with self-doubt, grief, and regret. It became a bestseller and added another dimension to his legacy, that of a survivor, a fighter, and ultimately a family man. And as the years go on, one thing has become clear: John Fogerty never stopped rolling. Whether it's a solo acoustic session in a studio, a roaring stadium packed with fans, or a quiet night jamming with his sons, the man who once sang of bayous and backroads is still making music that matters. He's collaborated with a wide range of artists in recent years, from Foo Fighters to Keith Urban, from Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top to Brad Paisley. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Fogerty released a quarantine version of Have You Ever Seen the Rain performed with his kids in their backyard. It went viral, a moment of unity and warmth during a dark time. He also published a memoir, Fortunate Son, My Life, My Music, in 2015, offering fans a deeper look at the battles he fought, not just with contracts and critics, but with self-doubt, grief, and regret. It became a bestseller and added another dimension to his legacy, that of a survivor, a fighter, and ultimately a family man. And as the years go on, one thing has become clear: John Fogerty never stopped rolling. Whether it's a solo acoustic session in a studio, a roaring stadium packed with fans, or a quiet night jamming with his sons, the man who once sang of bayous and backroads is still making music that matters. Today, John Fogerty is not just a rock legend, he's a living monument to perseverance, authenticity, and the enduring power of music. You hear him in the growl of country rock, in the storytelling of Americana, and every raspy-voiced artist who dares to blend grit with grace. You hear him at baseball games, in movie soundtracks, on classic rock radio, and in backyard barbecues. He's part of the fabric now. For the 50-plus audience, those who remember the first time Green River hit the radio, or who watched Fogerty's battles unfold over the decades, his story feels especially personal. It's not just nostalgia. It's validation. It's a reminder that talent can be buried but never erased. That truth can outlast control. That music, when it comes from the heart, never expires. John Fogerty's voice has always sounded older than his years, rugged, lived in, honest. And now that he's in his late 70s, it fits him more than ever. Not because he's faded, but because he's finally caught up to the weight of everything he's carried. His concerts still sell out. His family band plays on. His songs are still relevant. And after more than 50 years, he finally owns every note he wrote. He is, and always will be, the sound of the working man. The storyteller of swamps he never walked through, but somehow made us all feel like we had. And maybe that's the greatest magic of all. John Fogerty didn't just make music. He made moments. Songs that stuck with you, fought for you, and stayed with you through it all. If you grew up on Creedence, if you ever belted out Bad Moon Rising on a summer night, then you already know. This music isn't old, it's eternal. Thanks for watching Southern Sound. If this story brought back memories, hit like, share it with someone who grew up on the same soundtrack, and let us know in the comments, what's your favorite John Fogerty moment?